Conservatives, a lot of the time, American conservatives, like to paint themselves as the champions and defenders of free speech, and they are especially defending it from the woke left mob. Now, a lot of these people have made careers on this stuff, but what we're going to do today is talk about the Nick Fuentes Twitter ban and how these conservatives like to rally around people like that and say, you know, this is an attack on free speech. We've got to defend this guy no matter how much I hate what he says and how gross I find it. He has the right to say it on YouTube and Twitter. But we're going to talk about how that logic really never applies when left-wing people get attacked or banned or censored for their speech. And then we're going to talk about why do these guys do this? And similar to a gaming video I made like last year, conservatives love free speech for right-wing people. They do not love free speech for left-wing people. The same way conservatives love right-wing politics in video games, they don't like left-wing politics. And that's when they talk about, you know, get your politics out of my video games. So we're going to cover all that stuff today. I'm going to plug my socials and Patreon for about a minute, so skip forward if you're not bothered about that stuff. But before we get any further, a lot of my work on this channel is demonetized because when you're covering more serious, sometimes edgier topics, YouTube doesn't like this. So if you've ever enjoyed my work, please consider becoming a patron. And you don't have to pledge a crazy amount. I want to build up my Patreon based on as many people as possible pledging little amounts, like $1 or $2. So if you feel like I have ever brought anything that's worthwhile into your life and my content, please really consider becoming a patron to help me continue to do this regardless of if YouTube monetize or not most of my videos in a given month. Also, if you want to join our communities, come check out our Discord and my subreddit. Those links in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, please check out the Karanicholas at Twitter, at Instagram, and also my personal Reddit where you can keep up to date with all my content and what I'm doing. For every 5k, we get a new chocolate orange. 35k at the moment. I think we just hit 36k. Help me get to 40k. I'm targeting that by November, my birthday month. I'm also back from my holiday. I was away for about 10 days. You might not have noticed because I did schedule a couple videos for when I was away. But yeah, I'm back in the swing of things. And that means I'll be live streaming on Tuesday and Thursday this week. And I archive those streams on my second channel, the Karanicholas Extra. Now, alt-right figurehead Nick Fuentes has been banned from a lot of social medias. He's also allegedly on a no-fly list in America as well. But let's get into the recent drama just to frame this whole video. So Alex Kaplan tweeting, white nationalist Nick Fuentes has been banned from Twitter. Going on to say, Fuentes' ban from Twitter comes days after Michael Hayden reported that Twitter told him that Fuentes was not violating the platform's rules. Now, according to a Twitter spokesperson, Trenton Kennedy, Fuentes was suspended for repeatedly violating Twitter rules and said, this is all I can share about the account right now. Now, Nick Fuentes, as part of the alt-right, is one of the few conservatives who really hates Ben Shapiro. And that's mainly for, of course, racist reasons. And Nick Fuentes has also harassed Ben Shapiro and his family in person. So you'd think someone like that might have a bit more self-respect to, go and defend him. Now, you guys might think, well, Ben Shapiro is such a great defender of free speech. He even defends the speech of someone who harassed his family. And we're going to get into that argument later. But Ben Shapiro tweets, Nick Fuentes is a garbage person with garbage beliefs. Twitter is also filled with lots of garbage people with garbage beliefs. Only certain people get banned. Nobody should trust Twitter's supposed free speech neutrality. Now, for a guy who's obviously very passionate about racism against Jewish people, funny that he is going to bat for someone who basically denies the Holocaust and has said multiple racist things against Jewish people. Michael Knowles, Ben Shapiro's BFF, also saying, the swift and utter unpersoning of Nick Fuentes should worry anyone who in any way contradicts the dominant liberal regime. For those who haven't followed the story, Unpersoning does not refer to his Twitter ban. He's been kicked off every major social media platform, reportedly banned from every major financial institution, and placed on the no-fly list without ever being charged with a crime. Now, Michael Knowles is also someone who doesn't like Nick Fuentes, and to his credit, I think he makes a very good case that Nick Fuentes' beliefs and his speech probably aren't suitable for a social media platform. So here's him over a year and a half ago talking about Nick Fuentes.
And Nick Fuentes lied to my face, then lied about me on the internet. And then only when I figured out who he was because I Googled him, I realized, and some might try to refute this in the room, but it's all on video, that he has endorsed Jim Crow segregation. He has denied that the Holocaust happened. He has associated himself with fascism openly. He said if Antifa were fascist, he would be marching alongside them. He has associated in the past with avowed racial bigots like James Alsop and Richard Spencer, though apparently now they're having something of a tiff from what I gather on the blogs. It is quite clear to me that he harbors racial bigotry. That's why I reject his politics.
So there is Michael Knowles saying that Nick Fuentes is a racist and a fascist, but apparently it's worth defending his right to free speech on Twitter, where he can continue to spread this stuff. Again, I don't understand the logic of these free speech absolutists, as they sometimes try to paint themselves, although I will get into how these guys aren't free speech absolutists. And then you have Dinesh D'Souza also say, that little twerp Nick Fuentes is now the Rosa Parks of the civil liberties struggle in America. This is more than he deserves, but it's a distinction the left and the digital censors have unwittingly conferred on him. Now, what also makes this more ironic, and I'll get into my own opinions on, like, you know, freedom of speech and social media, but Twitter obviously has its own policies on hate speech, like many social media platforms do, and that's why this guy has been banned. These guys are all like some of the most rabid capitalists. If you're rabid capitalists and you agree with the capitalist system, Twitter is an independent corporation. It can make any rules it wants on its platform, whether you agree with the rules it makes or not. In a capitalist system, you guys surely must believe, if this is so bad, then why don't you guys just go start your own social media? And then you can say whatever you want, like Parler, for example, or Gab. Go talk on those things. You guys are capitalists, so go and, you know, enjoy the competition of it all. And that's just a nice hint of irony underlying all this stuff, that these conservative capitalists complaining about an independent corporate platform having rules and regulations. Now, in general, I agree with the principle that social media does have to police speech to a certain extent, right? So you'd think that most of us could agree the stuff that Nick Fuentes says and tweeted is not okay. It incites violence, it incites racial hatred, and there's no place for that in like a civilized society. And I agree with people like that not having a platform to spread these toxic beliefs. But now the other side of the coin, while I agree with that sort of stuff, I don't really agree with more of the monopolies forming on social media and how they become the police of speech in general. So my own example, I make my living off YouTube. I've had numerous awful experiences with YouTube, content removed for seemingly no reason. I've been permanently demonetized at one point, which they both said on both occasions it's a wrong decision. And basically what it is, on the dominant video platform, YouTube, you're basically having robots decide if your work is, you know, suitable or not, or if it breaks the guidelines. There is no human review involved. And I think that adds to the problem. And of course, in, you know, a capitalist system and a corporate capitalist system, something like YouTube isn't going to like left-wing people as much, people who will call them out. And of course, often left-wing people don't have as much capital or power, so they don't have as much influence on YouTube or can put as much pressure on YouTube as a site. So that is a massive problem. So I agree, there are lots of problems to do with free speech and social media. But I wouldn't die on the hill that Nick Fuentes is banned, because I agree with the ban, because you shouldn't be able to incite racial violence and just general violence. That is something that is good about social media's rules, because also in the real world, in a lot of countries, you're going to get in legal trouble for saying that stuff anyway. Although the UK is cracking down bad on free speech in general, like criminalising protests, one of the good things I agree with in the UK is that a lot of these far-right groups are criminalized. Like, you will go to jail if you join them. And I think that's a good thing. But America is, of course, different with the First Amendment, where free speech is a lot more, I guess, relaxed with the rules and stuff. But again, it feels weird these guys want to die on this hill. But it's also very weird these guys want to die on this hill in the context of plenty of stuff that is both happening that they don't talk about as free speech warriors, but also the stuff they actually push to attack people's free speech in general. Anyway, I thought it'd be fun quickly to list some real free speech issues that these conservative, these free speech warriors have been silent on before wrapping it up with this really good article that really delves into how disingenuous these guys are. So you guys remember this one. Outcry after Associated Press journalist fired amid row over pro-Palestinian views. The Associated Press has fired a news associate, Emily Wilder, for violating the company's social media policies, a move that drew backlash from journalists after it became clear that Wilder had been targeted by right-wing media outlets for her pro-Palestinian activism in college. Wilder is actually Jewish, by the way. Wilder confirmed to The Guardian that she was terminated for violating the company's social media policies in their news, values and principles sometime between my start date on May 3rd and yesterday. Wilder said the AP did not detail which of her tweets broke the policies. Wilder said, "There's no question I just got cancelled." She said her editor had previously told her she would not get in any trouble because everyone had opinions in college, but then came the rest of the week. So her activism was in college. It wasn't when she was doing her job or applying for a job. She wasn't tweeting on the job about this stuff. This was just in her past. So of course these more neocon conservatives had no problem with that because they don't like criticism of Israel. So if someone's losing their job because of their pro-Palestinian activism, who cares about that? But wait, I thought these guys were for free speech. Free speech when it's from people who are in the proximity of you and maybe your audience like, but if it's someone genuinely getting fired from their job because of their activism in college and their free speech, you guys don't care. You guys are silent. You guys are not backing this woman. You guys are not trying to reverse her firing. Just don't say anything. So here's another one where conservatives were actually trying to censor people's freedom of expression, and these guys had nothing to say either. So, sorry conservatives, the First Amendment doesn't care about your feelings either. In a recent cartoon for the Salt Lake City Tribune, political cartoonist Pat Bagley called attention to the high number of white nationalists that occupy law enforcement roles in the United States. The cartoon brought a protest to the Salt Lake Tribune's printing center, organised by right-wing groups such as Utah Business Revival and Blue Line Unites Everyone. One Facebook group linked to this said, "The Tribune needs to stick to reporting, not publishing their personal beliefs," apparently unaware that a political cartoon in the opinion section of a newspaper is supposed to convey an opinion that will evoke an emotional reaction in the readers. Conservatives have often claimed to be defenders of free speech, but their attack on Bagley's First Amendment rights demonstrate their tendency to pick and choose which speech they will allow. He goes on to say that Bagley's cartoon is well sourced by the facts, and then says, despite the facts behind Bagley's cartoon, State Representative Mike McKell and many other Utah Republicans attacked Bagley for his artwork on Twitter. Utah's Department for Public Safety went so far as to issue a press release criticizing Bagley. Apparently, the government can now use taxpayer money to attack the free press. While some of Utah's elected officials may disagree with Bagley's assessment, they should not attack him for voicing his opinion or ask him to retract or apologize for the cartoon. It's blatantly inappropriate that a public department would engage in criticizing the free press or an individual Utahan, especially given that Bagley was well within his constitutional rights. So again, loads of local government getting involved, trying to censor this cartoonist's free speech and freedom of the press at that as well. Conservatives didn't really have much to say about that either. I really thought these guys were the free speech champions. Surely, if they're defending Nick Fuentes, who personally goes after them, and in their own words, promotes fascism, surely they're also going to defend someone who is making satire of police, or may have done some activism in university and then got fired from their job for that activism. But how about massive mainstream Republicans also attacking freedom of expression or freedom not to express things? So DeSantis signs bill requiring Florida students, professors to register political views with the state, public universities in Florida will be required to survey both faculty and students on their political beliefs and viewpoint, with the institutions at risk of losing their funding if the responses are not satisfactory to the state's Republican-led legislature. In an unprecedented project, which was tucked into a law signed on Tuesday, is part of a long-running national right-wing push to promote intellectual diversity on campuses, though worries over a lack of details on the survey's privacy protections and questions over what the results may ultimately be used for hover over the venture. So in a free society, you're allowed to both say what you want and also not say what you want. You shouldn't be forced by anybody to disclose your political views. You shouldn't have to register your political views with the government. But again, these guys didn't seem to have much of a problem with that. Authoritarianism led by conservatives, totally fine. Nick Fuentes breaking Twitter's terms and services. Outrage. Rosa Parks, the biggest free speech issue ever. So it's pretty clear these conservatives do not care about freedom of speech. They care about freedom of speech for them. They care about freedom of speech for their buddies. And they care about freedom of speech for people they might not like Nick Fuentes, but who are also people who support Donald Trump, also people who many of their own fans might like as well, even if Nick Fuentes really doesn't like Ben Shapiro. That's all well and good, but again, all these other people literally getting their opinions censored or losing their jobs because of political views, which were in the past. But I read a really, really good article which discussed all this stuff in detail, but I want to focus on the assessment of these people rather than the funding, because the angle of this is about all these institutions that talk about free speech are funded by Koch brothers organizations. Now this is from prospect.org and it's called "Why Should We Care About Faux Free Speech Warriors Because the Koch brothers Are Paying Their Bills." So it talks about Steven Crowder being demonetized and how these people all came out to defend him. So it says, the incident set a certain set of free speech warriors ablaze. Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, and other pundits who've made their name online for defending free speech, particularly those organised under the umbrella of the intellectual dark web, have made Crowder a martyr of the war on civil discourse. You've probably heard their arguments before. They claim to be opposed to censorship, no platforming, and any attempts to discourage the open expression of ideas. These figures, who self-identify as classical liberals, conservatives, and libertarians, say that their project is completely non-ideological. It's just about giving everyone a fair hearing. But these same free speech warriors went mum earlier this month when one of their own, Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson, met with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who has bragged about making Hungary a liberal and non-liberal state and has provoked mass protests for cracking down on academic freedom. Crowder's defenders have also neglected to mention that he once went with a camera crew to the workplace of a commentator he disagreed with, harassing and trying to get them fired. Indeed, intellectual dark web members and their acolytes have repeatedly fought against allowing those they disagree with a platform to speak. So that's a nice example as well, the Jordan Peterson one, but like I said, these guys have nothing to say when it comes to real issues of free speech. It's easy to dismiss the outrage and inconsistency of online free speech warriors who profit off the controversy, but there's a more serious and troubling dynamic at play. The free speech movement, including not only online pundits but also think tanks and academics and their mainstream popularizers, has always been about free speech for the right and suppressing the speech of everyone else. It is by and large funded by right-wing billionaires like the Koch brothers, who whip up anger about the intolerant left in order to stimulate opposition to their social, economic and political agenda. To understand the origins of the free speech movement, its priorities and its funding, you have to start not only on today's social media battlefields, but at college campuses. The narrative that has emerged in recent years is familiar. College campuses have become ground zero for a new generation of intolerant leftists. Today's lefty college students goes the narrative popularized in the 2015 Atlantic article, The Coddling of the American Mind, insulating themselves from opinions they don't like. With their safe spaces and trigger warnings, they stifle intellectual debate, protesting even the appearance of anyone whom they happen to disagree with. And if we don't fight these snowflake kids and their entitled professors who support them, then we don't insist that the views they are suppressing get heard, then we are ringing the death knell of a civil society. The American college campus, this narrative goes, may be the precursor to the Stalinist gulag, and you've heard that in the rhetoric of Jordan Peterson. The article going on to say, but despite its wide currency in online media, the coddling of the American mind doesn't hold up. political scientist Jeffrey Sachs has found that young people are actually more tolerant of potentially offensive speech than older Americans, and the 4 years of college actually makes students less supportive of banning such speech. And for all the hoopla over no platforming, Campus Free Speech Watchdog Foundation for Individual Rights and Education found that the last year there was a whopping total of 18 disinvitation attempts across all American colleges and universities. The number of those that succeeded is even lower. So if they're not actually destroying free speech, what's the issue that intellectual dark web and its ilk have of college campuses? Simple, they're not conservative enough. The real crisis the intellectual dark web fears with their free speech crusade is that the classical liberal intellectual tradition of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism is under threat by the most diverse generation in American history and the most radical in at least a century. It's not marginal speech that these free speech warriors are protecting, but that of the entrenched, powerful interest of our country's elite. Indeed, just looking at the college activism of some of these figures, from Wise's campaign against Muslim and Arab scholars at Columbia, to Peterson's call for instructors at a left-wing teachers' college to be put on trial for treason, a clear pattern of anti-left censorship emerges. These actions go far beyond mere personal animus in peeling back the curtain on the funding networks that have popularized the IDW's cause. An even more nefarious picture emerges, a coordinated strategic effort by right-wing billionaires like the Koch brothers to extinguish any opposition to their political, economic and social agenda. This article puts it so nicely, and I recommend reading it. It goes on to talk about how much these guys are actually funded by Koch Media, for example. That includes Dave Rubin, Michael Knowles, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Barry Weiss. All these people are funded by Koch brothers think tanks, and they're all part of the same game. That they're acting like their speech, which is traditional, classical, liberal, conservative speech, is somehow under attack because people don't like it anymore. People are questioning the capitalist world order more. Gen Z are doing this, and that's why their attack primarily focuses on universities, critical race theory. They don't want Gen Z's views to become more dominant because it attacks their views. It attacks the status quo. It attacks the powerful. It's speaking more truth to power. So that's why these guys do not care about left-wing free speech. They do not want left-wing free speech. They pretend to be for free speech because they're talking about us. And I'm on the border because I'm 1995 between Gen Z and Millennial. They're talking about people like us being intolerant in this way because we have no time for this propaganda anymore. And we see the reality. We see how capitalism is not only destroying the planet, but destroying the working class and middle classes of countries like America and the UK. And we see that the only way we can address, the awful racism and brutality of the past is by really teaching it properly. And everything they're doing is manufactured to thwart that becoming mainstream, to protect capital at the end of the day. So that's why you have massive injustices, massive problems with free speech, not only on social media, but in society. And these people being completely silent. And why when Nick Fuentes gets banned off YouTube, or gets banned off Twitter, or Steven Crowder gets demonetized, or gets a temporary ban off YouTube, these guys go berserk and say, I don't agree with these people, but I support their right to free speech. And the reason, even if I don't agree with them, these guys are pro-capitalist. These guys are pro-conservative. They might not agree with them, but a lot of them, for the most part, are not challenging the world order. Significantly, at least. And you're going to score a lot more brownie points with conservatives for going to bat for Nick Fuentes' free speech, rather than going to bat for the AP journalist who was fired for their Palestinian activism in college. And I think it's very telling to someone like Ben Shapiro, what is more offensive, Nick Fuentes or a journalist who did some pro-Palestinian activism in college? I think it says everything about him as a person when Nick Fuentes' free speech is more important. Nick Fuentes pushing this stuff, Nick Fuentes harassing his family, is more acceptable to Ben Shapiro than pro-Palestinian activism. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. It's good to be back. Gonna make some good videos this week. Hopefully catch some of you in the live streams as well. Haven't done them for 2 weeks. If you want to join our communities, check out the Discord and subreddit. If you want to support my work, check out my Patreon in the description. If you want to follow me on social media, @TheCabernacle on Twitter and Instagram. And if you made it this far, thank you all for watching.